So vegetation is your friend when you're developing a marine shoreline property. So vegetation, let's look at the diagrams of talking about what vegetation does for you. So vegetation can be helpful on just about every property. And so we're going to go through some of those ways that you can use it. But making sure that your slopes are well forested and well vegetated with shrubs and trees can really slow the erosion process down. So you've probably seen this diagram before, but when you have a vegetated slope, the amount of water that enters the soil is greatly reduced, and the time over which it takes to move from one place to the other is increased as well. And so you don't have as much concentrated flow. And vegetation provides a lot of habitat benefits, and we talked about the overhanging vegetation on the beach as being really important part of taking care of our marine shorelines. So we have another diagram that might be helpful. So the roots that are on trees and shrubs do a lot to hold the soil in place and keep things from sliding. And though grass roots are not as deep, they also help. So I would recommend a combination of trees, shrubs, and forbs to really create a dense foliage on your shoreline. So when we're going from undeveloped to developed, we're having a lot of added surface runoff, and that runoff holds all the contaminants that are falling on our roads from our cars and from our pets, and so whatever we can do to increase the vegetation and filter the water through that vegetation is a benefit. So by establishing a healthy vegetated shoreline, you can save some time and money, protect your property, and your neighbors will appreciate your vegetation, and it can also help to protect our local economy and conserve our natural resources. So restoring our shorelines with vegetation is a good thing to do. So on those site visits I've mentioned, I've seen lots of examples of lawns all the way to the beach, and people who've decided to cut down their trees at the edge of their slope because they're worried about the tree tipping over and causing additional erosion. But I've also seen trees that have been hanging out over the beach for many, many years, and they've established root systems that go back into the bank and really hold things there. So I would encourage people to restore the native vegetation along the shoreline. We have some good examples of that coming up. But tree roots offer many different types of structure to the shoreline. There's fibrous roots and tap roots and lateral roots. So all of those different types of roots are penetrating the soil and creating a structure. I saw a study a while back about clear cuts on steep slopes, and they looked at how long after the tree was cut those roots are effective, and they work for a while, and then as they deteriorate, the slides happen, I think, at about the 10-year point. So if you do need to remove a tree, it's recommended that you get some other trees established before you do that, so that you can maintain a really strong root system on your shoreline.
And trees also can support each other through the relationships of their roots and the fungi in the ground as well.
Right, yeah, the network that they create. So here's some great examples of folks who figured out ways to maintain their views and maintain their vegetation along their shoreline. We really encourage folks to prune up the trunk to create windows through the trunks of the trees. And then you can see that the native vegetation was left down low, and that's important as well, because it provides a surface for all of that precipitation that we have to hit and slow the rate at which it gets to the ground. So it also allows the water to evaporate rather than penetrating the ground. So keeping that low-growing shrub layer is also important. So we mentioned topping and how it should be avoided. This is an area that has some pretty saturated slopes, and the landowners behind the slope were interested in maintaining their views and repeatedly topped their maple trees. But what happens when you top a tree is that the same amount of vegetation that's taken from above is lost in the root mass below because the plant can't feed it. And so the structural abilities of the tree are greatly reduced when you top it. And so you lose some of that benefit. So I really encourage you, if you have maples that are causing trouble for your views, to think about how you could prune them without reducing their vitality. So with conifers, you see on the left, there's some different techniques you can use. We recommend that you go in your house or your spot on the patio, the place where you like to look at your view, and really look at which limbs you could remove to create a window to see through and improve your view, rather than removing the tree entirely or taking the top out of it. So windowing, interlimbing, and skirting up are some different ways of talking about those things for conifers. And then with the deciduous trees, like the big leaf maple, oftentimes you'll probably have a maple that has 100 different sprouts coming up off of a stump or something. So one way to avoid topping again would be to choose 2 or 3 of those sprouts and remove all the rest of them, and allow those sprouts to grow up vertically, and then just take the side branches off as they grow up to create a more penetrable view through those trees. But the trees really offer a lot of benefits. So I'm going to go through some of the trees commonly seen on our shorelines and other plants, and just briefly, and talk about their benefits. Oh, and somebody had a question here about how does topping trees, especially conifers, affect the long-term health of the trees and their effectiveness. So that's a really good point. If you take the top of a tree, especially a conifer, off, what you'll see is that one of those top branches that's left will start to grow up and off to the side like this. And so then you have this weak point at the shoulder, whereas it gets bigger and then you get some windstorms, that part, blows off and breaks and falls on your roof. So it doesn't always create a safer situation for you by topping the trees. And then additionally, that cut that you've made at the top, that main stem, is an area for rot and other disease to enter the tree. And so it will often decline over time if it's been topped. So to really maintain a healthy tree, you want to make sure that you keep that main top growing point healthy and intact. Does that answer your question? And then let's see, long-term. So in addition, if your tree, the bluff stability question, if your tree is intact and healthy, it's sending out roots because it wants to live too. It will send. I've seen many times where really healthy large trees have sent roots way back onto the upland to hold on to that bank and support itself. So cutting it down isn't always to your advantage. All right, let's talk about some other trees. Here we go. So here's one of those Douglas firs I was mentioning that was just clinging to the edge. That bank in particular is a really consolidated glacial till bank, and so really hard soil. So there probably wasn't much room for the roots to go down into the soil anyway. So all sorts of lateral roots were growing out into the topsoil there. But these Douglas firs are doing a nice job on the shoreline. This is Pacific Madrona, and it's another great iconic Pacific Northwest tree. People say that they're really hard to get started, and the recommendation is if you want to grow one, you want to plant one, plant 5 and you might get one. And a couple of tips for planting these are, if you pick it up at a nursery, mark the pot which way is facing south, and when you plant it at your property, orient it in the same direction. And the other tip I heard recently, I haven't tried this or heard anyone else that's tried it, but to gather a little bit of soil from a mature Madrona, because there's some microorganisms that are established in the soils around Madronas that could help the new one get established. So might be a good thing to try.
They have a deep taproot too, which is important, right?
Right, yes. they do a lot to hold soils in place for their deep taproot. And so Western red cedar is a great tree to choose if you're living in an area with seeps on your banks, or if you have a bunch of alder or other kind of wetland loving plants. Cedar can handle growing up in the shade. And so those are good choices for shady locations and wet locations. And I just love this cedar here that's hanging way down over the bank and providing lots of shade to the upper beach and also protecting that slope. Shore pine is another great choice. They can do real well in open areas, and they grow pretty quickly and are easy to get established. Oregon white oak is one that you don't see quite as often, but this really beautiful, huge one here is at the Bayshore Preserve on Oakland Bay. And you can see over to the left, here's a tiny little oak seedling. They grow very slowly, but again, great big taproot, really, you know, sturdy tree that can grow for a long, long time and offer some really great benefits for your shoreline. And yeah, next slide. Willows are a great choice for areas with some moisture in the soil. And they're also fun because you can, if there's willows on your shoreline already, or maybe your neighbor has one, you can take cuttings from these plants and just put them into the ground and they will grow. So it's a really inexpensive way to get some vegetation established in the soils around on your property. And we can help you with some guidance on that if you're interested. And here's some lower growing things. Dune grass is great on just about any shoreline and sends out rhizomes to really form a tight network to hold those upper beach sediments in place. And then Lingby sedge is a great choice if you've got a seep or a stream that's coming out onto your beach. It likes a little bit of fresh water, and it does really well here too for kind of providing a place for accretion to occur. If you have vegetation on your upper beach, as sediments are moved into it, they stay longer. It helps keep your shoreline from moving along as much. So sometimes when I visit properties, I can tell that folks have been kind of weeding their beach because they want to have, you know, a sandy beach, but that leads to increased erosion and loss of beach material. So I really recommend keeping as much vegetation on your shoreline as you can. These are some fun ones. Pickle weed is a found kind of just below the high tide, and it's a edible plant that grows in salt marshes and is an indication of a very healthy shoreline. And then this gumweed, coastal gumweed, is a super hardy perennial that has these great flowers, and you could grow these back behind the high water line or right up to the edge. A great way to kind of diversify a lawn. If you have a lawn right up to your shoreline, this would be a great choice to add a little bit more buffer to your upper beach. And then if you're looking for something to also add diversity to your lawn that's really low growing, you could have coastal strawberry or yarrow, and these things can be mowed and they'll just keep coming back and add some habitat benefits with food and diversity and flowers for the insects to enjoy. So these are some, yeah. And then, so I really love snowberry. It, like willow, can be started from cuttings and it can handle pretty dry conditions. And so I've seen thick hedges of snowberry do a great job of protecting slopes from erosion and using those roots to really stabilize things. So snowberry is a great one. And then salal is also a great one in the shade. If you have a well-established salal patch, do your darndest to keep it intact. And if you have just a few plants struggling along the edge of your bluff, just maybe adding a layer of a little bit of compost and some wood chip mulch and not mowing or weed whacking close to them will allow those salal plants to reestablish themselves and give you some nice low growing vegetation. Oregon grape is another great native plant that grows along shorelines and can really thrive in either sunny or shady conditions. And then, of course, you've probably seen some of those marine shoreline properties that are just dense evergreen huckleberry thickets. Again, this is almost like an old growth thing, but as much of that as you can maintain on your bank or bluff to protect the slopes and reduce the infiltration that you're getting into your soils, the better. They're harder to grow back because they're kind of slow growing, but they're a wonderful plant to keep if you have them. And then Nootka Rose over here on the right is also a really great, fast-growing shoreline plant that can send out rhizomes and spread laterally and really establish a great buffer at your upper beach. Okay, we've got ocean spray. These are a little bit taller shrubs that grow well. Ocean spray can really handle dry conditions during the summer, and then the red flowering currant has lots of habitat benefits and grows very quickly. So if you needed a hedge to screen your neighbors or something like that, red flowering currant's a great choice, and it's beautiful, and the hummingbirds love it. So I'm going to run through some plants that you might already have on your property, or maybe you're thinking about protecting your slope with them. These are non-natives and things that we should avoid, and I'll try to cover some reasons why. But this slope here with English ivy, English ivy should be removed at all costs. It's a big project, but can hide issues that you might be having. There might be seeps or slumps that are happening that under the ivy that you can't see, and in addition, they cause kind of a habitat desert. Nothing else can grow, and so they take over. The English ivy can grow up trees and add a lot of weight to them and kill them, or just shade out their ability to feed themselves. So the first step is to get the vines out of the trees by removing some of those vines just down low where you can reach them, and they'll die back. Periwinkle and cotoneaster are common landscape plants that also kind of cause habitat deserts. And in particular, the cotoneaster can spread with seeds from birds, and so it's best to remove that as well. English holly, the berries, and birds carry the berries away. And then on the right here, this is knotweed, and we have an active knotweed control team at our office. So if you have that problem, let us know and we'll try to get you some help with that. St. John's wort and English laurel are also kind of fast-growing non-natives that can reduce habitat benefits on properties. And then when you're in the process of doing a restoration planting, often we'll use a bare root plant. So they're small when you plant them, and they just look like little twigs in the ground. And so it can be a bit discouraging. First year, this little rhyme is kind of fun. The first year they sleep, the second year they creep, and the third year they leap. So you just have to hang in there and take care of them in their first few years. Give them some mulch, keep the weeds away, and maybe a little bit of water to get them through the summers, and you can have great restoration projects on your shorelines.
And also just being okay with not having all of them survive too, because that's
right.
Yeah.
So we have some great resources for you. Our website has lots and lots of information about planting, and we have a native plant sale in February where we sell these bare root plants that are appropriate for restoration projects. We also, on the website, you'll find some kind of example planting plans and ideas of how to mix those natives that I was talking about for a pleasant shoreline layout while maintaining your view. And then other handouts that talk about the pruning that we were talking about, how to manage your trees so that you can still see out, and then a whole list of plants that do well on shorelines and their salt tolerance and that sort of thing. So really explore the website if you would like more information about plants. And in addition, during our site visits, we talk lots about plants. So if you have questions or are interested in doing a planting on the shoreline, please have us out for a visit.